Okay, Daniel,
Hello.
welcome to Basis 24. And you know somebody that we've been interviewing over the last few years. Would you have any idea who that guy is?
Yes, that would be one of my childhood buddies called James Casbolt, and now known as Michael Prince.
So how did you get to know him, and tell us the story?
I think the first time I met James, he came down with his dad and his mum, and he was moving into his dad's place. I think he'd had some problems up country in Reading from where he came from, and he was moving into his dad's place. His dad's place was above my mother's on Draycott Terrace, flat 1 my mother's was. His was the one above. This is in St Ives, Cornwall, and we got introduced via that. His auntie used to be best friends with my mother. Yeah, so I knew her children.
What are we talking about? What sort of
era? What era? Oh,
what
crikey, I was 12, so good 11 years ago. No, 21 years ago. Yeah, 21 years ago, crikey. Yeah, so it's a long time. I've known him a long time.
So we're just childhood mates? And
we weren't really that close when we were that young, actually. It was really weird. He was a couple of years older than me, so I suppose he was a bit above my age groups and looked down on me. I was, to say the least, a bit off the wall when I was a young kid, you know, as in I was full of energy and a bit crazy, so... Yeah, he didn't
think you were a special kid?
Yeah, I was one of the kids they would say was a special case and needed help, and you know I wasn't your average society child that was brought through. In fact, actually, I was classed as, from a very young age, as one of the most hyperactive cases they'd seen in 10 years in the UK, which is what they told my mum, my poor mother. Yeah, so I was a bit off the wall, and I think that James, he found it very difficult to handle me at that age because obviously I had so much energy and stuff like that. So we never really connected. I know that we spent like one night watching TV together and stuff and talking just about normal stuff, but other than that, we never really hung out until further on as I hit my adulthood, and he'd moved away. Like moved out of the house that he was in.
Let's concentrate on the times that you spent together when you were young.
Right, okay, well...
And what about this hyperactive child thing? Did they give you drugs and things?
Yeah, well, basically what it was I was diagnosed at a really young age, like something, I think it was 6 or 7. You'll have to excuse me, and I will say this now, my memory of things when I was back at that time has always been a bit foggy, but I can remember certain things, but dates and stuff like that and timings have been slightly a bit messed up, and that I've always been like that, and I think that's due to a bit of me as well, actually, because time to me is sort of, I've never sort of been a big thing about it, so dates and things like that. But I was classed as being super hyperactive, like one of the biggest cases they'd seen, and they wanted to give me Ritalin, the government, from a young age. Now, my mum sort of was totally against this, and she really didn't want to go down that path. But it got to a certain stage. Well, because obviously with Ritalin, if you do any research on Ritalin, it's actually medical amphetamine, which is speed, basically. It's medical speed. Now, if you're giving medical speed to a hyperactive kid, I mean, if anyone knows anything about amphetamine, there's no common sense or logic behind that. So my mum obviously would freak out. Now, they were trying to tell her that what it was because your hormones haven't set from a young age, what it does is actually level that out because your hormones aren't developed into adulthood, so it does the actual reverse charges. Now, anyway, I won't go into that yet, I didn't, but basically my mum didn't want me to do it, so she tried to hang on. And I was such a problem that... she eventually decided to put me on it in my later teens, like I think I was about 12 when I first started taking Ritalin. It was actually given to the school, and I used to get it from a special needs teacher, and he used to say to me, Mr. Carbethi used to say to me in the mornings, have you had your pill? Have you had your pill? And he'd give me my pill, and then I'd have one in the afternoon, have you had your pill? And then I'd have to take that as well. But he was always on my case about it. It was like something I had to do, you know, because the way I looked at it then was I was a kid who asked questions, and in the schooling system they don't want you to ask questions. They want everyone to be the same in uniform. So if you ask questions, you're a bit different, you're troublesome. And I would ask questions and I wouldn't take the silly answers if they didn't make any sense to me, so I'd end up becoming trouble. And obviously I had a lot of energy as well, so they didn't really know how to deal with me.
So they didn't like people at school asking questions so they could learn things?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, you look at the education system, you only have to look at uniforms and, you know, things like that to understand that really self-expression and being a bit creative and being an individual is not really what the system wants. I mean, otherwise they would push more music and push more arts and things like that. I mean, now if you look at the curriculum, those sort of things are being completely taken out of the teachings, and they're extending the years that the kids are doing in school. You know, that's obviously for a reason. They want your working class, don't ask questions, get on with your job sort of people, and the ones that aren't like that are just called trouble, basically, and put to the side as troublemakers or suppressed with drugs, or, you know, you're sick, you're ill, because you want to know what's going on. You some things aren't fitting, so you want to ask questions, you know.
Okay, so we're talking about Ritalin and the education system. Now, did you perceive that then, or are you looking at that backwards now?
I always knew from a young kid that something was messed up. I mean, I have memories of crying, having problems. Mum always used to blame it on teenage growth hormones and things like that. But I don't think when a kid is asking you, why do we have to work to get a job, to get money, to die and give it all away, and that's it? What kind of life is that to live? And that's what I used to say. Mum she used to say, I don't know, I can't really answer that, but you have to do it. And to me, as someone that questions something, that wasn't good enough. What do you mean I have to do something that just doesn't have any logical sense to it? There must be more. So I kind of knew, and I think that brought a bit of anger on, and, you know, a bit of confusion, as it would, because you want to know.
What about your family? What about your origins?
Okay, well,
because you've got.
I've got a mixture of blood. I've got so many mixtures of blood. Right. Okay. Well, from my mum's side, I've got English Irish. Yeah, so that's half my blood is English Irish.
English is a big mix of what.
No, just English Irish. But then, if you go to my dad's side, I have Portuguese, Chinese, and Ceylonese. Yeah, so that's 3 difference into one half. I don't actually class myself from any of these countries because I'm human. That's always the way I see it. Well, when you come from that many places, I mean, you think to yourself, well, hold on a minute here. I'm not really either one or the other, am I? You know, I'm a mixture,
but
so
I'm
just
human.
What about your blood type? That is my blood type. That is what it is. It's literally a mix from all the different countries.
Yeah, but are you rhesus negative? Or
I wouldn't know. I've tried to get it done in a hospital, and they tried to charge me money for it. And the doctors, I've tried to get it done from my own doctor. He tried to charge me £50 for it. I've always had problems with the doctors, tomorrow, actually.
If you wanted to go down to the hospital and give blood tomorrow, they would charge you £50.
I don't know about that.
You must give
I might be able to do it through giving blood, but I went to the actual doctor and just asked him if I could know my blood type, which they've obviously got on file, and he said for me to know that I'd have to pay £50, which I thought was ridiculous considering it's my blood and they've got the information, you know, so I wouldn't pay it. And maybe I should have thought of actually going. I didn't go to give blood, but then I kind of don't really agree with that either, because where's that blood going? Do you know what I mean? Yeah, one of those anyway.
Yeah. If you try and keep it.
Sorry about that.
Yeah. So okay. Do you have any stories, any information about your family, either side? Or
yeah, from my dad's side. I did a bit of research into my dad's side because my grandpa is like a man of many tales, should we say. He would always tell us tales from when we were younger, so you wouldn't know which was true and which wasn't. Well, it turns out my grandpa was actually Secret Service for the Brunei, or he was in the Army Secret Service. He worked for the Brunei Secret Service.
No, this is a big thing.
Well, yeah, it is a
Secret
big
Service
thing.
bit.
Yeah, I mean, he told me about some of the training they did there, like the mind training they did. He said a lot of it's mind over matter. I mean, my grandpa's like 96, and he always says like, sorry, I've got that something wrong there. He's not 96. He's in his 90s. Basically, my grandpa said that if it wasn't just for his asthma, he'd live. I mean, he's kicking, you know, you speak to him and he's fully there, he's together. He said it's a lot to do with the mind training they taught him. Like, they would have them wear, like, heavy sacks, and then they'd have, like, poles up here, and they'd have to jump up and kick these poles. But once they got used to that, they used to fill the sack with more stuff. So eventually, they would be doing, like, abnormal things. Another thing they used to do was they used to feel like in your old Chinese films, they used to put like hot sand into things, and then you put your hands in it. I think it's to deaden the nerves in your hands, so eventually you could hit and you wouldn't feel anything over it. I mean, he's told me stories of that before. My grandpa was tortured by the Chinese as well. Like I think that was in the Singaporean War. Oh, good grandpa was tortured by the Chinese. He told me that.
And what's your grandpa's history again? Is it Chinese?
My grandpa's history. Well, my grandpa apparently it's Ceylonese, which was occupied by Portuguese. The Portuguese. Now, according to my grandpa, the reason we haven't got any connections with his family, which I only found out quite recently when I was digging around, was because he married outside of the bloodline. Now, that's to me, it did actually make me laugh, because I was like, this is just getting a bit silly now. You know, well, what do you mean you married outside the bloodline? Well, apparently because he married a Chinese woman, and it wasn't someone who was within their bloodline or authorised by the family, they disowned him. And then over a period of time, they started letting him back into the family again. But my grandpa had kids, and he was a sort of verse person, as you could see. And those kids started marrying other women. Eventually, they just completely let go of him. But my granddad's title was Don Lenegade. That's Sir Don Lenegade. That was originally all our titles, apparently, that we could take. I could take that on as a Rodrigo, as from my family background. And apparently our family was something to do with the House of Lords, like some sort of history keepers or something, record keepers for the House of Lords in Sri Lanka. And I've typed it into Google and had a look, and you can actually come up with something for this Sir Don Lenegade, but I've found it very difficult to get any sort of solid evidence on it other than the fact of what my grandpa and my family has said. But through my family, it's well known. You know, because we all had a laugh about it. I mean, I was like, Sir Don Lenegade, can you imagine that? That'd be hilarious. You know, I found it quite funny. You know?
Is that a British sir or?
I wouldn't know the difference, to be honest.
Is it to do with the knights of European knights, or?
I wouldn't know. It's Sri Lanka, but the way I look at it is it was occupied by the Portuguese. So, do you know what I mean?
So it would be connected to the Portuguese royal family of some.
To the Portuguese, which is why, you know, maybe we got a Rodrigo. There's still a bit of thing about that. I mean, my grandpa said that the name was given to us by the Sultan of Brunei because he used to go to school with him, like, and then that was in Brunei, in Borneo. Like, he used to go to school with him. I think they fell out eventually, but apparently it was given to us by him.
So you've got some kind of intelligence connection in your family.
Yeah, definitely. There's some type of intelligence. I mean, you only have to look at my grandpa, and I mean, for someone that old, and I mean, apart from his asthma, and you know, he's quite, and mentally, he's always been very strong, very together. I mean, he came to this country. He's a school teacher. He teaches English kids and all sorts of kids English. He's not even from this country. He speaks like 5 different languages: Malaysian, English, Chinese, Singapore, you know. So he's a very intelligent mind sort of person.
And what about your immediate family then?
My immediate family, well, I don't really see too much of my father. I mean, I've met him recently, but me and my father, my dad left when I was 4, and we sort of seen each other up until the age of about 18, and then it was sort of like we cut off from each other. I think we sort of realised we were different people, really, and it's quite a hard one. My mother's still around, bless her. She's a lovely woman. Yeah, does a lot for me. Yeah, my mum's still around. Other than that, my grandpa, he's still around. My nanny just died recently. I've got untold amounts of uncles because my grandpa and nanny used to foster kids. So
Did that bring you into the care home system or what?
It didn't bring me into the care home system, but I have been into the care home system. I was forced into the care home system, actually.
Okay, you were talking about your father and your immediate family. How did that work out?
Yeah,
what connections do they have with intelligence or anything?
Well, the only connection that well, actually, that's not true. I mean, my uncle Douglas was in the Navy. My uncle Ian was in the army over in the Falklands. So I think we got quite not a massive, but there's definitely some sort of military background there. But whether or not that's just my grandpa, you know, he served in the military.
That's a lot of military there.
Yeah, and well, Douglas was a captain of his ship in the Navy. So, and he actually, funnily enough, now I remember when I went back for the funeral from my granny, I mentioned something called the Philadelphia Project to him, just to ask him to see whether he knew anything about it, because I was reading a book. And he gave me a very vague sort of answer. I think it was sort of on the similar sort of lines, well, did it happen or didn't it happen? With a sort of grin, like as if he knew more than what he was laying on. But I didn't question him anymore about it. But yeah, I mean, I don't really want to, you know, reach for anything. But yeah, there's definitely some sort of military sort of background in that area. Yeah, you know.
So why were you interested in the Philadelphia experiment, just like everybody else is?
Yeah, to me it's like, you know, I wanted to know what was going on. Being friends with James, I mean, you can imagine I've got brought up with James. I mean, we did many things together, and I'd sort of went away and come back, and then James talks about all this stuff that he's going through, and you know, I wanted to research. I was very much into researching in any way, but it was more on a spiritual level, shall we say, like a self-awareness level, rather than sort of what they call nowadays conspiracies, you know. It was more on like self-growth.
Okay, so when did you meet James, and what happened, and how did you get on together?
Right, I would say...
He described you as one of his best friends.
Yeah, well, he is, yeah.
But you also said that James got your mother onto heroin, is that right?
Not my mother, no.
Okay.
Basically what happened was that at one point in time there was a group of us that used to go around. This is when we sort of got together and stuff, and basically they all decided to do heroin together, and they got caught on it for a couple of years, so it was quite a long time. Now this is one of the reasons why I sort of left the country at the time, was because not only it was sort of doing I mean, you've got to think, these guys that we were doing it, we were like really close, all of us, you know, we were like brothers. And you know, I'm not going to lie, I never did it like all the time, but what I would do is once a month I would go around there, and I would do it with them and sit there and try and like communicate, because that would be the only time I'd see them. And if I didn't do it, I wouldn't have been able to sit round them. So I did it to try and experiment, you know, once a month with them, see how it went. But to be honest, it was kind of sickening, because they knew each other so well. We knew each other like brothers, and it got to the stage that where...
Okay, who was we at this time?
Well, James, I don't want to say too many names, because basically it's not sort of like out with one of them. But one of the guys was called James. Another guy was called...
I mean, is that James Casbolt?
Yeah, James Casbolt. Another guy was called Stephen. There's a couple more. There's three of us, but I don't really want to say their names, because I don't know if their family know about it.
Yeah, that's okay.
Yeah,
right. Okay, so you basically... I mean, who got the drugs?
It was brought in from some Indian lads that we knew, that we had connections to. They sort of brought it in. I didn't with me, because I was the youngest sort of lad out of all of them. One of them tried to protect me, whether or not it was through greed or whatever. He didn't really want me involved in it because I was so young. So they sort of like pushed me away from it. So I didn't really know to the full extent what was going on until after a couple of weeks. And I didn't, you know, I mean, if you want to get heroin in Cornwall, you only have to go to a town called Penzance, and it's flipping everywhere. You know, it's like it's strife there. you know, in Penzance. So, I mean, you can pick it up on the street down there. It's a well-known fact. That's why a lot of people don't like Penzance. It's got bad energy about it.
Do you think that's deliberate to give that bad energy? Because of St. Michael's mind?
Let's just say I know there's a lot of black magic and things going on around there, 100%. Because, well, James used to attend cults. Right, so.
Okay, well, let's focus on James. You know James, and how did you know him, and how did you get on? What sort of things did you do?
Right, well, the first time I sort of really got friendly with James, I think we were 16, and I got friendly through James through martial arts. I mean, we all smoked a tiny bit of weed here and there, so I think I went round his house one night, and we were all chilling out. They had a smoke, and James was, at this time, it wasn't really well known, the UFC, like Ultimate Fighting Championships. It's sort of got really big now. When James was watching it, it was like more back in the day when they didn't use gloves and things like this. But what James has always been very good at is he seems to pick the best people that he can to learn from, and then he'll take the best person and then he'll study it. So what he did was he took this guy called Hickson Gracie, who was the best Brazilian jiu-jitsu expert on TV, who was basically walking through people in this fight, and he learned like what he taught through these videos. So one night I've gone round there and he's taught me this thing, and I've done really well. Like we grappled basically, and I did really well. And from there he was a bit like, look, you know, I was really impressed. Would you like to come training with us from now on? Like that. And you know I talk about drugs, but you got to remember as well is that we were really healthy at this stage. We used to train like twice a day, 5 days a week. Like, so we were heavily into martial arts. I mean, we were doing Thai boxing, kickboxing, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. We were doing everything and just trying to take the best of what we knew, and then we would pressure test it. So, for instance, we'd fight each other full contact with like a helmet and gloves on to pressure test the martial arts to see which techniques would work under street conditions. You know, so.
And did any of them work under street conditions?
Yeah, of course. I mean,
which ones?
Boxing was very, very good. But boxing,
but
obviously.
Boxing isn't a martial art, as they would say.
Well, I mean, it's what you class as a martial art, isn't it? Self-defense.
Well, the martial arts are. I think most people would think there was imported from the Far East.
Well, no, that's not true to me. Well, martial art to me is something it's self-defense, isn't it? That's why people do martial arts generally. It's either self-defense or self-growth. You know, if you're doing it for self-growth, that's different. But if you're doing it for self-defense, to me, not all martial arts you could do. Not all martial arts are good. So you can't just say, oh yeah, this style's the best one or this style's the best one. I went into it heavily. Some techniques work, some techniques don't.
In other words, which ones are baloney and just for show, or to
well, I mean, you're talking
which ones are the real?
Well, with me,
deal?
when they were doing like a lot of the karate and a lot of the taekwondo and stuff like that, which I did, it's a sport, and judo, it's a sport. Yeah, so in judo, like for instance, I can say like if you're grappling with someone that knows what they're doing in judo, 9 times out of 10 you'll be able to get off your back. You'll be able to get up off the floor because they don't train for that. They train as a sport. They want to keep you both people want to be on the floor in a real fight. No one wants to stay on the floor because if they don't know how to fight, they want to stand up, get on their feet. You know?
Yeah, I think that's one of the most important conversations.
So in Brazilian jiu-jitsu, this is where it was basically judo street fight. So what they would do is when they're lying on their back and you're on top of them, they would tie their legs off so you couldn't stand up, and they would hold you, whereas if in judo you'd have an open guard. So you put the legs would be open. But that's a sport. If you do that to someone on the street, it's just going to stand up. You know, these are the sort of things like in karate, you know, if you stand there and you set your stance and you go through all by the time you've done that, you're going to be hurt. You haven't got time to set yourself like that. And especially, you know, I was brought up on the streets, really, I suppose. Not, you know, it's a small Cornish village, but it was quite violent when I was around in that day. And if you're in a pub and someone wants to beat you up and you haven't got any room to do anything, you can't all of a sudden throw this massive high kick or set yourself up. You haven't got time to do these things.
Well, this is one of the points that some critics of the martial arts say, that there's not a realistic
No, it's not. But this is the whole point. What we did was we pressure tested it, and that's what I mean. So we put it under street conditions. You know, I mean, we were grappling on concrete. So I mean, you that rolling around on concrete, we used to end up with bruises all over us. Like, God, I could tell you some stories. I ended up in hospital once through James. Actually, I was grappling with James. I was having an asthma attack while we were grappling, and he wouldn't let me quit. And he was like, "No, we're going to go through this, and you'll be all right." And I did actually do all right. I come out of it at the end, but by the end of it all, I had to go hospital because I'd used so much blimmin' air to struggle out of it. But I survived. It taught me a lot. That's pressure testing, because that's real. If that happened in the street, my mind wouldn't give, because I've already been in that situation.
Yeah. Martial arts. So you're getting really enthusiastic. You're having fights, or not fights, but you're training with James.
Yeah, because
could you tell us more about that, about him training and about how he was able to hold you down? What kind of role did he have in that?
James was absolutely lethal. I mean, to be honest, I've fought loads of martial arts. So I've trained with lots of martial arts. The guy was like uber talented. I think when we were grappling over 2 years, I probably beat him like twice in the whole, out of about 50 grappling matches.
And what sort of age are you this time?
I was younger, you see. He's a lot stronger than me at that time. I think I was 18. James is probably a few years older, like 3 or 4 years older, so he was probably in his 21. So I mean, yeah, when I was younger, I didn't really, because a lot of it's to do with technique then. I didn't have the technique to be able to beat him, As we got older, things evened out a little bit. But, yeah, he was
you maintained a relationship with James?
Pardon?
Yeah, so when did all this start? You're 21 years old. What sort of age was he?
We started training from about 17 to like maybe a bit, maybe 16 actually. It's probably a bit younger than that. I started training from about 16. By the time I was 18, I was starting to get to grips with it. I remember when I was 16, I was absolutely useless. When I first started, I remember I was useless. But right, to me, when you start looking at your health and you start looking at your body, and then you get into martial arts, the impact is, it's not just on your body. You start to realise that there's more, with everything else. So we weren't just doing martial arts. We, I mean, from the age of 16, I was also starting to study religions, because that was the closest thing that I knew to finding out what was going on. And James brought me into that as well. James gave me a book when we were 16 called The Tibetan Book of the Living and the Dying by Sogyal Rinpoche. And it was one of the best books. Well, I couldn't read at this time when he gave me the book, but I forced myself to read it because I liked it that much. So I took a dictionary. It took me like 8 months. I took a dictionary, took the book, and then I forced myself to read. And eventually I self-taught myself to read. But it was one of the best books I'd done, and it came from James, actually. And I remember...
So, that's a lot of philosophy, and that's a lot of heavy stuff. I mean, how did that work out?
I really got into Buddhism from the start, because it was like, to me, it made a lot of sense, But I didn't stay on one thing. What I did was I wanted to sort of see what was going on everywhere else. So I read books on Christianity and Muslim, just all sorts of different religions, And
so what was your motivation behind this?
Well, I wanted to know why we were here and what was going on.
You were doing heroin.
I mean,
had you given that up by then?
No, this was a bit later on. We'd been training for quite a few years, and we'd been out and doing. The heroin didn't really seep in until like the last couple of years, and it was only 3 years that it was there. I think it was more like around when I started to hit my 21st, that we started doing that.
Okay, well, forget about the heroin. I mean, where did this impetus come from? James seemed to be the leader in this.
Yeah, he was very much the leader. James had a type of aura around him, and this sort of leader quality, and he would, he helped me tremendously. Like, you do. I asked questions to him, and he'd say, well, he'd never tell me stuff. He'd just say, here, have a book, find out for yourself what you believe in this, see what you think. And then I would go off, read it, and then I'd be like, crikey, that's amazing, there's something there. He wasn't like sort of your brainwashing type, do you know what I mean? At that point, he wouldn't say stuff like that. He was very much sort of like, find out for yourself type of guy. He'd tell you, but he'd make you learn as well, He wouldn't just like take it from me. He'd give you books, and to point you in a direction about something.
Can you tell us more about those books?
Yeah, crikey, I've read thousands of books, really. I think, 1,000 actually.
These seem to be pretty heavy books.
Yeah, very heavy books. I've been into all sorts of spiritual books. I've been into Palladian light work when I was younger. Well, that was a massive thing with me and James, actually. We got into that. Looked at nature, spirits, all sorts of things.
Palladian light work, what's that?
Palladian light work is basically, there's apparently a group of extraterrestrials which are, have you ever heard of the Seven Sisters?
Only as a set of stars.
Pleiades, yeah.
Yeah, Pleiades.
Yeah, that's it. So apparently they're from there, and they're channeling through people, channelers, someone that communicates with them.
So how did this equate with you at this age? How did the extraterrestrial thing come up in your mind?
I don't actually know. All I know is that we just progressively got on and on. Basically, we looked at religion, and it doesn't take long to figure out it's basically based on fear to me. Right, that's my personal opinion. Don't want to insult anyone, but I looked at Christianity and Buddhism, and I was like, right, okay, you've got the Buddha, the Dharma, the Sangha, and then in Christianity you've got the Father, the Son, the Holy Ghost, and they pretty much mean the same thing. And then in all versions of Christianity you've got some sort of Mary with a baby, in religion, and I'm like, you just go through it and you go through it and you go through it, and it literally looks like it's being written by one person, but the one massive thing that they've got in common is they're all fear-based. It's like, Christianity, God loves you. I've had this argument so many times with Christians, like, God loves you unconditionally, and I'm like, is this what you're telling me? And they're like, yeah. And I say, so that's part of your teachings? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, I'm not a Christian, am I going to burn in hell for eternity? And they're like, yeah. And I'm like, well, that doesn't make sense. If he loves me unconditionally, where's the condition come in that I have to be a Christian? Oh, well, that was down to free will. And I'm like, no, if someone loves unconditionally, there's no conditions. That's it. You can't just start twisting things so they fit your own sort of, ideas. And it's the same with Buddhism as well. It talks about unconditional love and this and that, but then if you do bad, you're going to sit in the hell realm for eternity and have your eyes plucked out or burned or whatever. That didn't make no sense to me. I'm like, God loves unconditionally. He's not going to do that to his own. You love unconditionally. It doesn't work like that. Same with Muslim. You can go on and on. I'm not going to sit here going on about the religions, but basically, in my opinion, from my experience, there was basically a lot of fear involved in it. So I suppose we started looking a bit more outward, into alternative
How did you wake up to this? What was the thing which woke you up to this fact that the religions are like that? What was your awareness? How did that
My
happen?
awareness of it was just reading and meditate. I used to, we weren't just reading, because you can only get so much from reading. We were meditating as well a lot. We were doing
What type of meditation?
Just your normal breathing meditations, light meditations, chakra meditations, all sorts, anything that we could do.
And James led you in this?
James was a massive... James, let's get this right. James, when I knew him, was a loving being. We've all had our problems, we've all had certain issues, but he was a loving being, and he knew what God was, and he understood what God was. Or if he didn't know, it was definitely in his mind. It was there. It's a possibility, And we were studying for that. He was all about self-growth. He was all about self-learning, And that he was very much into all of that.
Where did he get this from? Was he trained?
His mum was a Buddhist, I think, and I think a lot. That's where I think the first part of it may have come from his mother, because his mum was a Buddhist. So I think obviously James has picked up some material from her. He's a very intelligent guy, James. He picks up something. He'll see it. That's what it was like when we were younger. He was on it. He was on it like a ball. This life is what they're telling us. It's not the life. It's not really life, is it? It's kind of insane, really, what they tell you life is and what we're supposed to be doing. It doesn't make any sense to me, at all. They say that we're quite advanced, and that we're, as a civilization, as a culture, we're getting there. But to me, we've done nothing but go backwards. Just because we're technologically advanced doesn't mean that we've morally set, or that we're good human beings and we know exactly what's going on. I don't think to some degree we have a clue in that area.
So how did this feeling with James happen? I mean, how did you get on well? I mean, with the other guys.
I would
This is
say
very
I
unique.
definitely looked up to James. Definitely.
Was that because he was older? He's like an older brother.
Older, and I really like. He taught me so much, and he was a very clever guy. It's a lot of good energy about him, you know. And he was very like, he took and accepted me, and I was really young, you know, and like. He brought me into, like, we called it the crew. We had a crew at this time of lads, you know, that like we all hung around together, and you know, we were good lads. We had lots of mates, but me, James, and a guy called David, he used to question stuff all the time as well. We were like more into the spiritual side of it all. The others weren't really into that. There was more to do with
what
the
sort of number? How many of you were you?
Just there was 6, 7 of us close, maybe 5 close every day, and there was 2 that used to turn up every now and again. So, you know, we had quite.
And this is St. Ives.
Yeah, this is St. Ives. Yeah, everyone knew who we were. I mean, people who see this will know who I'm talking about and stuff. You know, the only reason I haven't mentioned names is just for them, for their families and stuff. You know? So
James. Tell us what happened with you and James, and you had these you were getting wise.
Yeah, we used to get. Well, if you want to know what some of the stuff we used to get, well, we sort of figured out that when we were doing meditation and stuff, or if we wanted to capture something that was on an etheric level, on an energy level, we'd use a digital camera, and it seemed to like, for some reason, I don't know why now, but for some reason we used to get quite good shots of things like when we were meditating, we'd take a picture, and sometimes you'd see like the whatever you want to call it, magnetic field, the aura, the electrical field or whatever. You'd see it, and then if we were doing like certain meditations where we were pulling energy in from outside, from the top, you'd see like the extension of it, or you'd get like funny lights.
You'd be able to photograph.
Yeah,
aura.
I've had some really amazing photographs. This is the thing, I lost so much of my stuff. I lost a lot of photos and stuff that I had. I mean, not like wow, you know, but some things that we did when we were outside. We took a lot of pictures of plants and things like that, and things came through like little faces and little like just. I think in a way.
You're saying that you saw little fairies, or maybe leading you on, or
that's what they call them. They call them nature
elementals.
Spirits. But then in my eye, all nature is energy, isn't it? Like everything. You know, everything's just energy. So if you're like putting your awareness on something and taking the picture of it, then maybe the awareness, you know, and the energy, it transforms into form and matter. So it's just energy expressing itself. To me, that's the way I look at it. I don't know whether it was a being or whatever, you know. It looked, in my eyes, it looked like it because it had like little face and stuff. But it you know.
Did it respond?
No, not that I know. We just took pictures. When I took the pictures, this is the funny thing actually. When we used to take the pictures, and usually nothing there, and then all of a sudden, I mean, you can ask James about it. He'll tell you about it. I think I've shown other people the pictures as well. Probably shown my mum, but she wouldn't have believed it. Yeah, and it's just things like that. So, from a very early age, whether or not that was true or not, we kind of realised that there was something else, you know, because we were getting like evidence. I mean, not just that. Right, well, ADHD, there's a big question with this for me, because I was classed ADHD. I was told that like I had to take these drugs, so I was never going to be normal. I'll be able to function in society, you know. And
ADHD is what?
It's attention deficit disorder.
Yeah, okay.
It's when you can't keep your attention to one thing longer than 10 minutes. Well, if you can read a book, that's already classed that completely out the window, really, isn't it? You know, and if you can watch a film, you know. So really, it's just a lie to me. ADHD. What happened to me was. Do you want me to go into this?
Yeah, just explain it briefly.
Oh, I'll explain it briefly.
And the relationship with.
Basically, what happened to me was, when I was going really healthy, for like 8 months, I just stopped everything. Like, I decided no alcohol, no this, no nothing, no weed, no nothing. You know, just completely clean. You could eat clean, healthy. All of a sudden, after about 6 months, I would start vibrating. And while I mean vibrating, I mean I'd be sat there, and I would physically start shaking. I could feel this like energy. It was almost like I'd have to jump up or I'd have to do something. I could feel this it was awful. So it'd drive me nuts. I mean, it would get so strong sometimes. If I was talking to you here, this would start vibrating. My voice would start being really weird because of the vibrations. So I was like, well, if I go to the doctors, they're just going to give me a tablet. So I'm not going to do that one again. Maybe I should look at some alternative therapies and try and find out what it was, rather than going straight to the Western doctors who basically just want to suppress everything, and then the problem comes back again after you stop taking the tablets or drugs. So I went to... Actually, I didn't do that at all. What happened was my mother got an email from a woman that was totally out of the blue. Her name was Gail. She was a spiritualist Cornwall leader, and my mum used to be into it. Well, she hadn't contacted her about 2 years, and all of a sudden she sent her a video on a talk that was going to happen in 2012. And my mum wasn't interested, but I was. I was like, okay, I want to go because there's obviously people there that might be able to help me, and I'm quite a firm believer that something's there and it turns up. Maybe sometimes you should look into it, and it was quite a big coincidence. Don't really believe in that either, coincidences. But so I went there anyway, and funnily enough, it was supposed to have 250 people in it, and only 4 ladies turned up at the whole talk. And I was sat there. We were sat there watching the video. Watched half the video. Lady goes over, turns it off. She steps to the front and she looks at me because I'm like 18. I'm like the youngest person there. Everyone else was quite old. And she goes, "What are you doing here? Why are you here?" Like, I think she was just curious. So I've gone up to speak, and I've sat down on the chair, started telling them why I was there, about this vibration, and it just went bang like that. And as I'm talking, my voice is cracked. I'm like shaking, like I'm going, look, this is it. This is what I'm talking about. Well, funnily enough, synchronicity or coincidence, or whatever you want to call it, all the 4 ladies that were there were all healers, and they didn't even know each other. So they were like, "You know what that is, don't you?" And I was like, "No." And they were like, "Well, you're obviously a born healer." They said, "You need to learn how to..." Basically, it's energy that's coming in. You want to call it chi or whatever, or energy from wherever. Well, it's energy that's coming in, and you need to, you're like a battery that's just being constantly charged. And if you don't know how to channel that energy or get rid of it, you're literally going to have big problems. So we all sat round in a circle. They all held my hands, and it was basically just consciousness, intention. And they told me to push it out through my hands and my feet, and within, I think it was about 3-4 minutes, I felt what they were talking about, and it was literally like a release. It just went. I was like, this is amazing. And then it wasn't like it was just a steady flow, rather than just a constant battering. It was a steady flow. So
you'd learned how to harness this?
Yeah. And
are you still able to do that?
Yeah, 100%. Do it all the time. I actually use it in martial arts as well, like with chi and stuff like that. Yeah, so... yeah, I learned how to harness it. I wanted to learn more, so I joined some group in Penzance called the Holistic Healing Course, which was basically, it's a recognised qualification that they were setting up a government scheme so you could become a healer within the National Health Service, because they were bringing in these new rules that nurses would have to have Reiki 1 and 2 and levels, stuff like that. This is what they were telling us at the time. So I went in to do this because I didn't really know anything about it. So I went in to study this, and studied it for nearly 18 months, and then decided not to do the final exam because I could see the corruption running through it and stuff like that. But I learnt a lot. Yeah.
What sort of corruption?
Well, I mean, they were telling me that if I did a consultation with someone and that I spotted something that was bad that they were doing in their lives, like for instance taking some sort of medication or something that repetitively, or doing something that the doctor had given them or something like that, I couldn't actually mention it at all. And I thought that was really, for someone that's supposed to be a healer and care about someone's health, if someone's doing something that's hurting them, surely I should be able to say, look, I think maybe you should talk to your doctor and ask him to give you a different tablet or something. But I wasn't even allowed to mention it. So to me, what it was doing was basically, it was saying, well, alternative therapy is nowhere near as good as Western medicine. You haven't got the authority to say anything about it.
Well, I think that's exactly what they. In other words, if you did do that, you get into
yeah,
trouble.
you get sued, and I had to have insurance to heal people. I was like, so you're making money off me as well, and you're telling me you're governing me, you know? Well, let's get it right. What have the Chinese been doing for the last God knows how long? You know, they've run the whole medical society on something called Qi and the Meridian line. You know, their whole medical society is totally different. You can't say like 1 billion people are wrong. They've been curing things we've been curing. So maybe, you know, it's us. Maybe we need to open our minds and mix the two together rather than going, we're the best, we've got this medicine.
Well, I think you'd be directly coming into direct conflict with the whole medical thing.
Well, of course, because it's money, isn't it? You know, let's be honest, right? Anyway, we won't go into that. Yeah.
Well, in the last 15 minutes, let's concentrate on James Casbolt and what happened after 21, and where did he go, and what happened? How long did you?
Well, after we got to 21, I think there's a lot before then, because we've had a lot of experiences.
Tell us about it then.
There's so many experiences, so many crammed into so many short spaces. It's really difficult to remember all these dates and stuff. But I know.
Well, start at the beginning and let us know.
The big experience I can remember, which really, really woke me up, and this is after doing months of Palladian light work. I was doing it for about 3 or 4 months, and things started going really weird in my house. Like the kids, I used to live with a woman called Sally and her kids, and she used to rent a house out, and I used to rent a room off her, and just weird stuff like the TV would turn on or the stereo would turn on and things like that, just for no reason, and it was happening all the time. And in the end, she actually had to tell me to stop doing this, whatever I was doing in her house, because it was freaking her kids out. Anyway, what happened was, within that time that had happened, me and James and another girl were walking down the road, and we basically got to the bottom of the hill, and there was these like 3 lights in the sky, like they looked like planes, or helicopters to me at the time, but they were flying in a perfect triangle like that, and they were just flying straight over the sky. Nothing, I mean, they could have been planes or helicopters, but then what happened next was they just stopped dead. Now, I don't know any crafts that could do that, and they just stayed there, and what they did was...
Were these 3 lights together?
Yeah,
as
no,
one
they were
formation?
like 3 separate lights, but they were in a triangle. They were separate ships, or separate whatever you want to call them. They were moving, and then all of a sudden they stopped dead. And the funny thing was, they turned into stars. Right, but they weren't stars. You could tell the difference between them. If you looked at a star and you looked at the object would have a funny sort of red and green, like sort of flashy glow to it, and the stars would just look normal. And I've been able to spot them ever since. Actually, I've seen them quite a few times, just up in the air, and then they'll move along and then change. But the funny thing about this one was, because this one was the big one for me, I couldn't really remember what had happened. I went away for a couple of years and came back. And I was talking to James about this experience we had. And all I remember is these stars happening, and I can remember we lost a bit of time, but I thought it was more like time distortion because of the shock of everything. I didn't really realise what had happened. Anyway, I was talking to James, and James comes out and he goes, can you remember the black mist? And I was like, what black mist? And he was like, the black mist. I was like, what are you talking about, black mist? He goes, can you not remember the black mist? I was like, no. And he was like, well, this black mist came down, and we all started screaming. And I was looking at him, and I honestly thought, in my head, I remember thinking, is he losing it? What's he talking about? I can't blimey remember this. Anyway, I went to speak to the girl that was there about it, and I said, oh, James is going on about this, and I had a grin on my face, and she said, well, can't you remember it? And I was like, no. And as she started explaining it, boom, it came back, and I remembered it. And basically what had happened was, before they turned, it was weird. It was almost like a beam, but it was black. and it just covered it. It just literally took out everything. It was black, and then we grabbed each other, started screaming, and then I've got complete memory bank from there, and we lost like 2 hours. That's where the time had gone. So it wasn't like fear distortion.
So what was this thing, like a black goo in the air?
Honestly, it was like someone had hit a light switch, but it wasn't like all black at once. It sort of like came at like this to cover your peripheral. Do you know what I mean? It's like a beam, but black. Like it was like a beam of. I can't. That's the only way I can explain it. That's the only way I can remember it as well. So.
What happened? Can you what?
We just lost a lot of time. Like we lost hours, and I remember going back to James's house because I was so scared. And James's house looked directly over where this incident happened, and these star things didn't move the whole night. They were there. We were looking at them. The funny thing is, the house that I was doing all the work in, because I didn't sleep there that night, I went back in the morning, and the woman's come downstairs and she's like, what happened last night? And I was like, well, what do you mean? She goes, were you locked out? I was like, no, I went to stay at James's. She goes, well, someone was ringing this. We had this secret doorbell no one knew about, which went up to the top room for the guy that lived in. She goes, someone was ringing the doorbell all night like that. And I was like, well, it wasn't me, like that. And she goes, I woke up with some guy in my room, and he wasn't a normal guy. She said he was about 8 foot tall, and she said I was paralysed with fear. And she said, because she I think she knew what I was up to in the house with this Palladian light work. And she goes, also, because we had a house full of tenants, she goes, one of the tenants' room, stuff had been moved out when it was locked when they were asleep and put into someone else's room, like under the bed, like, and it wasn't even there, and it was locked. Just really weird, strange, bizarre stuff. I mean, it was unexplainable. I just thought, well, it's too much to be a coincidence. Maybe someone's having a laugh, but then to happen on the same night that all this stuff happened, it was really weird. And I mean, it's even weirder to think that they're moving stuff around. So I don't know, but I think that was the last time I started playing about with Palladian lightwork, to be honest. After that, I was a bit like, okay, well, this isn't for me, you know? I'm not into this, like, because it was done without sort of me really knowing what had happened. It wasn't like, oh yeah, we've asked you. It was just boom, like that, all of a sudden. And I'm like, well, I wasn't very comfortable with it.
So was it an entity or a human being?
I have no idea.
Shadow,
I mean, as I said, this is just information that I'm giving. That's my experiences. I don't really want to. I could put my spin off from what I feel, but then, you know, it's just my spin off, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? It could be.
Well, what is your spin off on this then? What's your personal feelings for this?
I believe it could be either government or extraterrestrial. That the ships. And then the other stuff, it could be all sorts, couldn't it? You know, you're playing around with energy, you open up energy things, and, you know, you're doing stuff in the house, you're saying words that you're not really sure of and things like that. You know, you're doing, it could be anything, it could be a spirit or whatever, you know. No, that's the way I look at it. Like, could be anything that happened in that house.
So that wasn't a craft. I mean, are you talking two incidents here? You're talking about the black mist?
Yeah, that happened. Well, it was happened exactly the same night. This is why I'm mentioning it, because it was so weird. Because I went to stay at someone at James's house. You know, I was that scared. Like, and then it all happened in the same night.
So James's house was some kind of a refuge then?
I was terrified. I'd just been through like a massive ordeal. It was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that before. I couldn't even remember the black mist, and I was terrified. Those ships didn't move. They were still there. Like in the morning, till about 6 a.m, I could still see them up there. And then they just disappeared when we went to bed. Well, we went to sleep, woke up, they weren't there.
So that means they weren't stars that you were looking at, because by that time they would have moved.
100% they weren't stars. Stars don't fly from one end of the sky like that all the way across, stop, turn, and they weren't stars when they did this. The only time they even resembled a point of stars was when they stopped and changed in the sky. And then they just resembled a star. I mean, then they looked more like a space station or something like that, because they were just like red, green, like you could just see them. But you could, let's put it this way, if you seen them and you weren't sure about what you were looking for, you'd mistake it for a star, 100%, without a doubt, you know? I've seen the same things before.
Stars move.
not like, yeah.
I mean, stars were movable a period of time.
These were fast, and they were perfect, and they didn't look like stars. They weren't. They were a different colour. They were like, I think they were like yellowy orange at the start or something. They were just I knew that they looked like helicopters. Yeah, and they were moving. They were silent. They were moving at speed.
But helicopters are a hell of a different thing to lights in the sky that never move.
They were like that. Well, that's what I thought. Logical brain. I've never seen this stuff before. I was going, maybe they're helicopters. You know, we were trying to make sense of it, and then all of a sudden they just stopped dead in the sky, and these lights changed, and they looked like stars. You know, that's the thing. They like flipped, and then they had the star sort of quality, but they were. If you look really closely, you could see like a different colour spectrum. That's the only way that I could describe it.
So is this your first UFO
That was
event?
my first major UFO experience, yeah.
And it was with James?
And that was with James, yeah.
And a young
and that's
girl.
100%. I put my life on it.
And
yeah.
what was James's reaction to this?
To be honest, I can't really remember. I remember we were all scared with the black mist because we were all hugging each other, screaming. And I remember like he was into me going back to his house. 'Cause, I mean, we used to chill out together all the time anyway, and he was like a bit shaken by it, I think, you know.
Did he ever mention it later?
Yeah, we talk about it all the time. We talked about it quite a lot. You know, it's not like you would, wouldn't you? If you had an experience like that, it'd be like, oh my God, you know.
And were you able to recover any further memories?
I had regression done on it, but I don't want to go into it.
Was
I
it
had
hypnotic?
regression from a therapist in up near Plymouth, and she was a qualified therapist, but she didn't put you under. You were like conscious,
Yeah.
and then she'd pull you through it, and I got lots out of it. Yeah,
Such as?
This is it, you know. I'm going to go into it. It just sounds wacky, right? Okay, basically, what I recalled from that when I was talking to her was that this black mist, and then I went up, like in this like black mist. We ended up we were all frozen, like literally we couldn't move, and we were like stood there. There was James, this girl, me. And this like colonel in a green like fucking suit came towards us. Like he looked like the typical sort of cartoon marine that you would get, but a person in a green sort of suit. And he came up telling us that it's all alright, everything's okay, don't worry about it, we'll look after you, blah blah blah. But during this, my therapist decided to go into this green guy for some reason. I don't know why, but she was like, "Can you see what's is this green guy who he says he was?" So as I've gone into the green guy, it turned out apparently to be a projection, and it wasn't a green guy at all. It was actually a grey behind him who was talking to us and using a hologram as an image to make us feel safe. And that's all I got taught, and that's all I can remember from that one. But I don't know if that happened or not. As far as I'm concerned, I've been into UFOs, I've been into spiritual stuff for a long time, so my imagination's probably quite good. So but the funny thing is that this is the thing, I can remember these things, these regression sessions like they were last week, you know. So the memories haven't like faded. So if I made something up.
How long ago were they?
So over 2-3 years ago.
Oh, so relatively recent.
Yeah, recent like that. Yeah, I mean the regression was about 3 years ago. Yeah.
When was the actual event?
Oh, that was a long time ago. Crikey, that was like talking over 10 years. Yeah, over 10 years, 11, 12 years, something like that. Long time.
Well, we're going to take a break, and then we're going to continue on James and how he got to where he got last time.